Hi, everyone. As some of you may know, but others will not, it's been a long while since I put up any new content on this YouTube channel. I've been suffering from impaired health, severely impaired health.
Jordan Peterson just checked himself into rehab.
What?
Yeah.
Whoa, for what?
He's had to spend 4 weeks in the ICU in terrible shape, but with the help of some extremely competent and courageous doctors, he survived.
I think he was just really devastated that his wife was essentially dying right in front of his eyes. And so he probably couldn't handle it, so he got on some medication.
He is a clinical psychologist, a lecturer, an author, and perhaps most importantly, a man who truly changed my life for the better, Dr. Jordan Peterson.
What happened? Well, an accident is when 3 or 4 or 5 unlikely things happen at the same time. And I would say that's what happened.
In February of 2020, the man slowly awoke from a deep sleep. Not a deep sleep like he had been out all night, but a deep sleep like he had been in a coma. Actually, a medically induced coma that lasted for over a week. The 57-year-old man had been completely unconscious for 9 days, and if he was arousing from a nightmare, the reality he awoke to was much worse. As his eyes opened, the man noticed he couldn't move, not because his body wasn't working, but because his body was strapped down to a patient bed with 6 large leather straps in an ICU room that didn't quite look familiar. If this wasn't enough to strike serious fear into his already anxious mind, he noticed the nurses around him were speaking a foreign language. Last the man remembered, he was in a hospital in Toronto with his family nearby. But now, whenever now was, he was in a totally different hospital in a totally different country, strapped down to a bed with the only people around him speaking Russian. These were the confusing and dire circumstances the man awoke to, quickly escalating his anxious and fragile thoughts to anger, fear, and unadulterated panic. Confusion, dreadful apprehension, and hopelessness had been his unwanted companions, and yet, despite his best efforts, they were only gaining in size and scope. As he began wrestling with thoughts of self-harm, the man could only describe this descent into madness as a trip to hell. This was not the life of someone who had 1.4 million Twitter followers, 1.3 million Instagram followers, 860,000 Facebook followers, 207,000 Reddit followers, and who the New York Times would proclaim as being the most influential public intellectual in the Western world right now, especially for someone who had dedicated his life and career to better understand the human mind and to practically help with others with psychological disorders. But it was painfully obvious now. Jordan B. Peterson, the famed Canadian professor of psychology, clinical psychologist, and YouTube personality, couldn't keep his own mind from fracturing. Like the most broken and miserable of people, he too was at a total loss. And after months of entrusting his mental and physical health to a psychologist, psychiatrist, and the best that medicine could offer, he was now completely dependent upon the only 2 forces that mattered in his life: his family and his faith in God. The former were unmistakably known and present, but the latter was invisible, nebulous, and shrouded in deep mystery. No matter how much Dr. Peterson relied upon his close friends and family, they were only human and could only provide so much. Jordan needed healing and relief that his family, indeed humanity, could not fully provide. Who and what God and faith were to Jordan was unclear, but that he wanted and was desperate for him, now more than ever, was definitely not. Jordan Barrett Peterson was born July 12, 1962, in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and grew up in the nearby small town of Fairview. His mother, Beverly, was a librarian at the campus of Grand Prairie Regional College. His father, Walter, was a school teacher. The small-framed Jordan would be the eldest of his parents' 3 children. With nothing to do in the small town, everyone knew each other quite well. Jordan became friends with a girl across the street named Tammy Roberts. She was only 8 years old, but it seemed they had a crush on each other. The 11-year-old Jordan would tell his father that he was going to marry her one day. But first, he had to finish high school, in which he started in 1975. When he graduated from Fairview High School 4 years later, Jordan entered the college that employed his mother to study political science and English literature, in hopes to one day become a corporate lawyer. But during this time, he read George Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier, a book that wrestled with the bleak life of those working in the industrial age of North England and the place that socialism could have in alleviating their miserable circumstances. Orwell's book impacted Jordan greatly. He would later transfer to the University of Alberta and graduate in 1982 with a BA in political science. Just after this, Jordan visited Europe for a year where he took a studious approach in understanding the psychological origins of recent European totalitarianism. This led him to not only become a student of history, but of psychology as well, where he delved into the writings of Jung, Nietzsche, and Dostoevsky. 2 years after receiving his first BA, Jordan then received his second from the University of Alberta in psychology in 1984. He then moved to Montreal for further schooling at McGill University. And it was during this stint that Jordan married his lifelong friend and neighbor, Tammy, shortly before earning his PhD in clinical psychology in 1991. The newlyweds soon welcomed their first child and daughter, Michaela, in 1992, and their second child and son, Julian, in 1994. Michaela suffered greatly from an autoimmune disease at a very young age and was diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis at 7, severe depression at 10, and idiopathic hypersomnia at 21. By the time she was only 17 years old, the young woman had to undergo a hip and ankle replacement. In this busy time of raising a young family with the added stress of one child suffering a severe autoimmune disease, Jordan and Tammy moved to the United States so Jordan could teach and research at Harvard University. After 5 years, they returned to Canada, where he would join the Faculty of Psychology at the University of Toronto in 1998. He has remained there since. Among being a husband, father, teacher, and clinical psychologist, Jordan soon became an author. In 1999, he published his first book, Maps of Meaning. It was a collection from his many lectures that explored the connection between psychology, philosophy, mythology, religion, and neuroscience. And as time passed, Jordan grew in both his practice and knowledge. His time at the University of Toronto allowed him to find his voice and compile his thoughts in a world that was changing faster than ever before, and where extreme political ideologies were growing largely unchallenged.
What's in a name? Potentially a great deal. University of Toronto psychology professor Jordan Peterson has a fight on his hands after objecting to proposed legislation that he says would violate his freedom of speech by forcing him to address transgendered people using the pronouns of their choosing. Good to have you three here and our two friends in Points Beyond. We appreciate everybody being on the program for what is, I think, one of the hottest topics in the country today, Professor Peterson, and it's all because of you.
Jordan began to make a name for himself in late 2010 for what seemed to be his conservative views to the cultural changes sweeping across the Western world. But it wasn't until 2016 that Jordan really began to become a known figure on an international scale. In May of 2016, a certain bill was introduced under Justin Trudeau's Liberal government. It was an act to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code, otherwise known as Bill C-16. Passing in the House and Senate, the new bill became law upon receiving royal assent on June 19, 2017, which came into force immediately. The bill's aim was to prevent violence and discrimination against individuals on a basis of their gender identity or their gender expression by penalizing or even criminalizing citizens for not using the preferred chosen pronouns of the aforementioned. Incensed that the new bill would legally require compelled speech, Jordan began to boldly and clearly speak out for free speech and against any law that either stifled or compelled it. Having a rich knowledge of totalitarianism and knowing this bill was politically driven, Jordan put out a series of YouTube videos condemning the bill, which poured over into a general critique of political correctness and identity politics. His videos quickly garnered millions of views, stirring the hornet's nest of the far left, but resonating and gaining support with far more people from a variety of backgrounds.
Well, fundamentally, there were two things that really bothered me, although there have been other things I've thought about since. One was that I was being asked, as everyone is, to use a certain set of words that I think are the constructions of people who have a political ideology that I don't believe in and that I also regard as dangerous.
What are those words?
Those are the made-up words that people now describe as gender neutral. And so, to me, they're an attempt to control language and in a direction that isn't happening organically. It's not happening naturally. People aren't picking up these words in the typical way that new words are picked up, but by force and by fiat. And I would say by force because there's legislative power behind them.
This put Jordan at odds with the extreme progressives whose cultural and political foes usually came from conservative or religious sects. And oddly, Jordan was neither of these. He might have held some views that leaned further right than left, but he always classified himself as a classic liberal, and he wasn't speaking from a pulpit. Indeed, Jordan held to objective morality, but his own personal views on religion were nebulous and were far from fitting into a traditional systematic theology. Instead of speaking from a political or religious platform, Jordan spoke from an academic one, being a highly regarded psychologist whose articulation and deep thinking formed a scholastic hybrid of philosophy, psychiatry, and history that challenged as well as encouraged many in unfamiliar ways. Even though Bill C-16 was ultimately passed, Jordan and his critique served as a public bulwark against extreme ideologies that usually sneak in legislation largely unnoticed and worse, unchallenged. But Jordan was not a one-trick pony. He seemed to take on any invitation to speak and could give lectures on a variety of topics ranging from religion, mythology, and history to philosophy, totalitarianism, and neuroscience. He also encouraged a healthy masculinity, and by doing so he found himself at odds with the current feminist doctrine of toxic masculinity. His prior stance on rejecting compelled speech for the transgendered created another group of political enemies. Jordan was also one of the few public figures taking on the front of the identity politic of white privilege. But Jordan's courage to speak out against mainstream social issues was not done without a cost. A staff member at Penguin Random House Canada, by whom he was published, summarily accused Jordan of being an icon of hate speech and transphobia, as well as an icon of white supremacy. By all of his political adversaries, Jordan was generally dismissed as an angry white man. But despite the many political, philosophical, and controversial overtones of Jordan's content, much of his advice was very practical, down-to-earth, and irrefutably good. In a word, Jordan challenged everyone, both his private clients and those millions publicly listening to his lectures, to become better people by accepting more responsibility. Stand up straight, make your bed, beautify at least one room in your house, discipline your children, tell the truth, work hard and be grateful in times of suffering were just some of his overall messages that attracted many and various types of people. Although Jordan had unintentionally amassed a large following of younger men, his audience was made up of men and women, theist and atheist, religious and secular, as well as those on the political right and left. all found Jordan's insight and advice to be thought-provoking at least, and life-changing at best. Continuing to appear on countless shows, podcasts, interviews, debates, and lectures, Jordan's fame was growing widespread. In 2018, he took a break from his teaching and clinical duties to work on his second book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. The groundwork had been laid for the self-help book to quickly become a bestseller in several countries, and it was. Being promoted with a world tour, Jordan would eventually sell more than 5 million copies. He had been in the public eye for years, but now his popularity was soaring, and his ideas, both the simple and the complex, the practical and the philosophical, were not only being welcomed, but tried and being found true by many. After the book tour, it seemed that Jordan was at the pinnacle of his success. But little did he know that by the very beginning of 2019, the next year of his life and the lives of his loved ones would start to unravel. But unknown by Jordan, things may have started to go wrong as early as 2016. He stopped taking an anti-anxiety agent that he had been on for 20 years because of a recent change in his diet that he thought had rendered them of little to no use. But soon after, in 2017, Jordan became very anxious and could not warm his body. He always felt physically cold no matter how many layers he covered himself with. His blood pressure also became dangerously low, causing him to nearly black out whenever he arose from a sitting position. And on top of all of this, Jordan suffered from complete insomnia. And sleep is the one thing that anxious and depressed people need and crave, as it's the only time to allow their mind to rest. With all these ailments, Jordan's family physician soon prescribed a benzodiazepine, which greatly helped with the insomnia and lessened the other symptoms as well. Under the assumption that benzodiazepines were relatively harmless, Jordan continued to take them for the next 3 years. While this change of medicine seemed like a good decision at the time, being coupled with the success of his book and his world tour, it might have precipitated his severely impaired health that started in January of 2019. The year started in Zurich, Switzerland, where Jordan's daughter Michaela underwent surgery to replace much of her ankle that was originally replaced over a decade earlier. And while it wasn't a life-risking surgery, Jordan noticed an abnormal fear within himself begin to rise. No sooner had Jordan seemed to emotionally recover from his daughter's stint in the infirmary, only 2 months later, in early March, his wife Tammy prepared to undergo surgery to remove her kidney cancer. Although the cancer was fairly common and completely treatable, there was always a risk. This only heightened Jordan's troubled and anxious thoughts, and the surgery thankfully went as planned. But 6 weeks later, Tammy's diagnosis changed for the worse. She was actually being afflicted by a rare malignancy which had a 1-year fatality rate of near 100%. With this news, Jordan was now dying inside. His mind and his body was racked with fear. As their 30th wedding anniversary approached, Jordan could not fathom living without his lifelong friend and wife. 2 weeks later, Tammy underwent another surgery to remove the rest of her kidney and the nearby lymphatic system. The procedure seemed to stop the cancer from growing, but introduced another fatal predicament of her now impaired lymphatic system leaking fluid, up to a gallon in a single day. Tammy and Jordan immediately traveled to Philadelphia to begin more testing and treatment options. When only being there 4 days, the draining completely and somewhat miraculously stopped. Thankfully, while Tammy recovered to wholeness remarkably fast, Jordan's descent was nearly beginning. In the midst of being with his daughter and wife through all their surgeries and recoveries, Jordan asked his doctor to prescribe a higher dosage of the benzodiazepines, as he was in an unusually stressful time in his already stressful life. But all this did was make his anxiety worse. As another attempt to treat his constant depression and severe distress, Jordan's doctor took him off the benzodiazepines to try a new drug, ketamine. Jordan said the few times he took the anesthetic psychedelic, it felt like a 90-minute trip to hell. Soon after jettisoning the ketamine, Jordan then went into acute benzodiazepine withdrawal. The physical pain, the mental anguish were unbearable. Jordan now suffered from uncontrollable restlessness, extreme anxiety, thoughts of self-harm, and even suicide. After learning about the dangers of sudden benzodiazepine withdrawal, a close friend and physician started Jordan on the benzodiazepines once again in hopes of a controlled and slow withdrawal. While this helped with the more immediate symptoms, he was far from healthy, and after about 3 months, it was clear that Jordan was not improving nor really cutting back on the benzodiazepines. He then traveled to an American clinic that specialized in benzodiazepine withdrawal, which after 3.5 months there, with ultimately nothing to show for, Jordan and his family began to look elsewhere. So by December of 2019, after nearly a year of mental trauma and physical decline, Jordan left the States and checked himself into a local hospital in Toronto. He was there for about a month, in which, once again, the help he received was very limited. Besides finding no real answers in Toronto, Jordan contracted double pneumonia. By this time, he was delirious. And then it went dark.
I've been suffering from impaired health, severely impaired health, as a consequence of benzodiazepine use for anxiety, or more accurately, from a combination of using that medication and then ceasing its use once I realized it was dangerous. That's put me in and out of hospitals for much of the last year in Connecticut, in the United States, in Toronto, in Canada, in Moscow, in Russia, and in Belgrade, Serbia, as my family searched for specialists who could aid me in the severe post-use withdrawal and neurological damage-related consequences of both the benzodiazepine use and its cessation.
The next thing Jordan remembered was waking up in Moscow. Out of desperation, his family had moved him there from the Toronto hospital. The facility in Moscow had placed Jordan in a medically induced coma to undergo the worst of the withdrawal symptoms. On January 14th, he was taken off of anesthetic and intubation, and a week later moved to an ICU for neurological rehabilitation. Here, Jordan practiced basic motor skills like walking upstairs and learning to sit and type. By February 7th, 2020, Jordan was slowly getting better, so the family decided to relocate to the warm weather in Florida. But that was just as COVID-19 became a worldwide pandemic. By May, 3 months after leaving Russia, Jordan was becoming worse and had returned to the original medication that had been forcefully stopped in Russia. Jordan was defeated. With no hope and nothing to lose, Jordan and his family decided to move to a Serbian clinic that practiced a novel approach to the problem of benzodiazepine withdrawal. Finally, 5 months later, after nearly 2 years of battling severe depression, anxiety, and benzodiazepine withdrawal, Jordan emerged from his ordeal, not fully recovered, on October 19th, 2020, to inform his YouTube audience of all that had befell him and his family. Slowly and carefully, he began to complete his third book, 12 More Rules, which was published March 2nd, 2021. Since then, Jordan's life has started to look like it did before, as he has been busy engaging in more interviews, podcasts, and shows. But looks are almost always deceiving. Jordan was not the same, nor will he be the same as before this trying crisis of health. His traumatic experience is still being processed, not only because it just happened, but sadly, as of writing this, the remnant effects remain a very real part of his life now. It might be easy for onlookers to forget his dire circumstances, but it will not be easy nor even possible for Jordan to forget. even if he wanted to. Going through an ordeal like that is never forgotten. One never simply gets over it. While there is healing and there is newness, traumatic events like that changes everyone for the better or worse. This is evidently seen in Jordan's wife, Tammy. Because of her near-death experience, Jordan confessed that she has begun attending to some issues regarding her own spiritual development. And no doubt Jordan has and will do the same. But exactly what that will look like, no one knows. It seems Jordan himself doesn't even know. With his health crisis still too close to put behind him, Jordan did an interview on March 1st, not even 2 months ago. Regarding the person of Jesus and his faith in him, Jordan soberly contemplated.
And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived, plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief, and I don't understand it. Because I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. That's Jungian synchronicity. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. We have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. We treat it like it's real. It's not the objective world. But the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that, in principle, is supposed to be Christ. But I don't know what to... that seems to me oddly plausible.
Yeah.
But I still don't know what to make of it. Partly because it's too terrifying a reality to fully believe. I don't even know what would happen to you if you fully believed it.
Jordan expressly stated what saved him throughout this ordeal. The love I have for my family, the love they have for me, the encouragement that they delivered along with my friends, and the fact that I still had meaningful work I could struggle through during the abyss. But it should leave us asking this one question. What is the love of family and friends and the drive to produce meaningful work without the one who is love and gives meaning to all things?
Anyways, I'm not going to make this a long video. I wanted to tell you that I'm back in Toronto, that I'm in much better health, although it's still severely impaired, especially in the morning. But I can work again, and I really want to. And that to let you know that with God's grace and mercy, I'll be able to start generating original material once again and pick up where I left off. Thank you very much. And, well, thank you very much is probably sufficient. Bye-bye.
So this episode is different from our previous ones in that we usually present people who have already passed on and people who are believers, those who have placed their faith in Jesus as being the Christ. And Jordan Peterson is neither of these. He is very much alive and well, even though he's still recovering to wellness. And while it seems that he is drawing nearer to placing a real saving faith in Jesus, to my knowledge, he hasn't ever outwardly proclaimed that. So for all intents and purposes, I'm not going to speak of him as if he has. So the question remains, why do this episode? And for a number of reasons. One, because Jordan Peterson has become immensely popular, so much so that, I am somewhat just perplexed by it. And I want to try and answer what so many people from various backgrounds find in Jordan, what they find attractive about him. Secondly, many Christians follow him, and I want to try to answer that as well. And lastly, I'm doing this episode because whether or not you are in a church or outside of the church, I believe that we can all learn from his teachings, but also his character as well. So there's a couple caveats that I want to explain before we get started. First thing is that Jordan Peterson definitely has a very loyal following, and I'm not one of those. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just letting you know where I am. I'm not speaking as his number one fanboy. In case you might have thought that I was, I'm not. Also, from all of the true things that Jordan communicates, there's bound to be some untrue things. Like Proverbs 10:19 says that in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. People who run their mouth all the time and talk a lot, they're bound to say things that are not true or stupid things or whatever. And furthermore, I am somewhat jaded as to some schools of thought regarding certain aspects of psychology, namely Freudian's psychosexual writings and things of that nature. To put it simply, I am far more aware of the negative parts or errors of psychology than the positive ones. Because psychology is the scientific study of the human mind and its functions, especially those affecting behavior. So when one tries to undertake such a academic understanding or even a practice of understanding one's mind and even trying to manipulate one's behavior without first acknowledging God, his creation, his will, and man's sinful nature, then it's bound to go off the rails at some point, and it has. And so all of that is to say, I do believe there is a fair amount of psychobabble that can accompany some of Jordan's teachings and writings, and I'm weary of that. Not all of it, but some of it. I wanted just to put that out there. So when we ingest Peterson's words, just like any other person that we listen to or whose content we put into our minds, all that means is that we have to do the work of critical thinking. We need to decipher what is true, what is over our heads, and what is not true. So the first question we want to ask is this: why are so many people, and right now when I say so many people, I'm saying non-Christians, why are so many people attracted to Jordan Peterson? As stated earlier, Jordan has a very eclectic following. He does have a large following of younger men, but with that, he has fans and admirers from all over the political, religious, and cultural spectrum. And I want to see why is that? And obviously there's probably many reasons, but I'm giving you my very concise and limited opinion. There is such a thing as common sense, right? It's common, meaning that it's common to all people, to all strata. It's like inalienable rights. It crosses all classes, races, and cultures. So he speaks common sense, and this is inalienable sense or common sense. It's objective truth. And Jordan, despite his very long run-on sentences that at times are full of esoteric words and terms, he speaks objective truth. He speaks of things which are objectively true. His number one truth from all the aspects and fields that he speaks about, his foremost point is to be responsible. And responsible means to have an obligation to do something, or having control or care for someone as part of one's job or role. And here are some other truths that fall under the calling to be a more responsible person. These are the truths that Jordan speaks. He says, these are chapters from his book. Make friends with people who want the best for you. Discipline your children. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Be precise in your speech. Listen to people as if they know more than you. Be grateful in your suffering. Don't become resentful. Work as hard as you can. Don't do what you hate. Now, these are some of Jordan's titles, word for word, straight from his books. And not only are these sayings objectively true, a number of which can be taken straight from the Judeo-Christian ethic or the Bible, but these are also good. In fact, they are good because they're truths taken from the Bible. Jordan could speak truth by saying, place your tongue on a frying cast iron pan and it will hurt. That's objectively true, but no one's going to do it because it's detrimental to one's health. But people are not only listening to Jordan's teachings, but they're practicing them, and they're bearing the good fruit of them because not only are they true, but they are good. And from the titles themselves, they are not complicated truths. They are simple. They are inherently known. They are common sense, good truths. When Jordan was asked about what people say to him when they meet him, he said there's two responses. The first one is that their lives have been changed, their relationships have been restored, addictions have been broken, abuse has stopped, jobs have been held. There has been positive change happening in people's lives. That's the number one thing that people say to him when they meet him. He said that the second response by people that meet him after lectures or people he just meets walking down the street, the second response is that what he is teaching and writing, they already know and they have known, but they simply lack the words or the sentiments to express them. And this is because, again, Jordan is teaching common sense or objective truth in a way that he can only do. He uses psychological, mythical, and neurological terms, which is exclusive to Jordan by his education and his own unique personality. But when a majority of all he teaches is boiled down, it's really a simple and common truth. And so that is why I think he has got so many different people from various backgrounds who are attracted to him, because what he is saying is common sense or objective truth. And so addressing the second question is similar to the first. The second question is, why are so many Christians attracted to Jordan Peterson? And there are many Christians who are following Jordan Peterson. And so why are so many Christians following him? And my contention is that because they have no one else to follow. My contention is that church leaders have failed. Their pastors have been silent. Church leaders, both Protestant and Catholic, even though I'm speaking from a Bible-believing evangelical point of view, they have surrendered core teachings of the faith to the secular world, because everything now is political, and when everything is political, nothing is biblical. Right? When everything is deemed as being political, it cannot be taught in the church now. And Christian leaders, but specifically pastors, I think have believed the lie that their parishioners don't want to hear anything political, quote unquote political, from the pulpit. They don't want to have a Westboro Baptist church. And so they've gone so far as to not mention anything with political or controversial overtones. So why are so many Christians following Jordan? Because I believe he is actually saying what Christians who have the mind of Christ, who have the Holy Spirit, are too afraid to say for themselves. And I would also contest that we are too afraid to say it because our spiritual leaders are as well. Jordan is taking on biblical issues from a psychological, historical, or legislative point of view. So people are attracted to this because it's not coming from a pulpit. And that's the point. It's not coming from the church or the pulpit because largely church leaders, namely pastors, have given up on multiple fronts. Just a few of them. They've given up on sex, which includes gender. What does it mean to be a man and what does it mean to be a woman? Who is teaching our kids this? Who will teach our kids? Because YouTube will do it. Facebook will do it. TikTok is going to do it. They have been doing it. They will teach our children about sex and what it looks like to be a man or a woman or a man/woman. What does marriage look like? What does gender look like? And how can we even know what a good marriage is without even knowing that there are two genders? We can't even agree that there's only two genders. Our church leaders have given up on abortion, on the sanctity of life. You know, this issue was hijacked by politics long ago. So much so that when I was a child in junior high, I believed the lie that the fetus wasn't really a baby, or at least it was questionable. You know, what's wrong with removing a baby inside a mother's womb when the baby is referred to as just some tissue or some clumps of cells? And I believed that as a child growing up in a public school. And again, you don't have to be a Bible master or a Bible scholar to know that, Exodus 20:13, you shall not murder. It's one of the most simple and basic truths in the Ten Commandment. And so now we want to answer our last question, which is, why are all of these people, those Christians and those who are not, attracted to Jordan Peterson? One, because he speaks objective truth. Two, because he speaks in place of pastors, obviously concerning some hot button topics. Not everything. He's not even a Christian. But then thirdly, it's because of this. It's because Jordan has, or more precisely, he practices what we all admire, and that is courage. It takes courage these days to speak truth against the prevailing winds of the time. We really do live in a horrible time when questioning something is discouraged and speaking out against the prevailing thought or narrative can get you fired. It can get you canceled. It can get you whatever. It can do some great harm to you. Do you think Jordan Peterson likes being called an icon of white supremacy or an icon of transphobia? And those are ridiculous and hurtful charges that have no basis of truth in them. But those are the consequences when you disagree with the cultural fads that are being pushed. So I do not envy the pastor that is trying to lead his congregation through these difficult subjects by the objective truths of God's word. There is one. There's probably more than one, but one that we're going to look at right now. His name is Voddie Baucham Jr. He is one pastor speaking out against critical race theory, cultural Marxism, and social justice. Voddie Baucham quotes Elizabeth Charles in the beginning of his new book, Fault Lines. The title is called The Social Justice Movement and Evangelicalism's Looming Catastrophe. And the book is good so far. I haven't finished it, but what I want to talk about is his quote. He quotes Elizabeth Charles in the beginning of his book. She was an English Christian author and poet in the mid-1800s, and she writes this: "It is the truth which is assailed in any age which tests our fidelity. It is to confess we are called, not merely to profess. If I profess with the loudest voice and the clearest exposition every portion of the truth of God, except precisely that little point which the world and the devil are at the moment attacking, I am not confessing Christ. however boldly I may be professing Christianity. Where the battle rages, the loyalty of the soldier is proved. And to be steady on all the battlefield besides is mere flight and disgrace to him if he flinches at that one point. And what is she saying in this quote? It's like being in a fierce battle and your general or captain is calling everyone to the front lines. Come to the front lines. We need help. And one soldier is setting the table for dinner. That's good, but it's not needed. Another soldier is organizing the munitions. It's good thing, but it's not needed. Another soldier is cleaning the latrines. These are all good things, but they're not needed. We need guys on the front line. We need help right now. There's a battle being waged, and we don't need you setting the table for dinner because we might not be alive to have it. She's saying that too many of us are attending to areas that, while are important, are not crucial because we're neglecting the crucial battlefields of our time and our culture. Yes, pastors need courage, even more than us, because they are our leaders. And so we need to pray for them. We need to talk to them. We need to encourage them. But in the spirit of Jordan Peterson, he'd probably counsel that before we blame our spiritual leaders for a lack of courage, let's look at ourselves and let's fix ourselves first, because we need it. And the Bible from beginning to end is full of God encouraging his servants. And what does it mean to encourage? Well, the root word is courage, of encouragement. And to encourage means to put courage into somebody. It means to make someone more courageous. That's what encouragement means. And how many times did God call his servants and his leaders to be strong and to be courageous and do not be afraid? Because it can be a fearful thing when we obey God, when we go against the zeitgeist of the time. David said to his son Solomon, be strong and courageous and do the work that God has called you to. He will be with you. He won't forsake you. Paul in 1 Corinthians says, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, and be courageous and be strong. Lastly, Jesus was a man of courage. He was a man of boldness. One attribute of Christians in the genesis of the church was their Christ-like courage. In Acts chapter 4, verse 13, when the Sanhedrin, all these religious and educated people, when they saw the courage of Peter and John, they realized that they were unschooled, they were not trained, they were ordinary men, but they were astonished because they noted that these men had been with Jesus. What made them know that they had been with Jesus? Because of their courage and their boldness. Being Christ-like is having courage, and we all need it. Billy Graham said that courage is contagious. When a brave man takes a stand, the spines of others are often stiffened. So, if we want our pastors to have more courage, let's have more courage ourselves, and let's encourage them. Let's place courage into their hearts first. Whether you like him or not, Jordan Peterson exemplifies courage by speaking objective truth. And for that, I am thankful. I appreciate Jordan Peterson, although I, just like you, disagree with him on some issues. Regardless, he has my prayers, and he should have yours as well. Because wherever Jordan lands, he will bring thousands and he will affect millions. So we need to pray for his conversion. Paul the apostle commanded his son in the faith, Timothy, that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men. And if thanksgiving and prayer should be made for all men, May Jordan B. Peterson be one of them. Well, thank you again for listening. I really do hope that you found this podcast to be engaging, to be encouraging. I hope that I really did put some courage into you today. And I hope you found this episode to be enlightening. Jordan Peterson has said multiple times, usually emotionally and in tears, that people are dying for a simple word of encouragement. And I have been blessed by some of you who have given me a text message or a note saying how an episode has encouraged them or strengthened them. And I really do cherish that feedback. So I would ask that you would, if you haven't done that, if you would please leave a review and rate this podcast, because it would encourage me, it would give me more courage, and it would also put the podcast out to numerous people who would otherwise never know this podcast existed. You can share this with them. You can tell it about them. You can go to our website at salvationandstuff.com, and that would be a real blessing to me. Thanks again for your time. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you soon. Bye.